The afternoon sun filtered through the thin curtains, casting long shadows across the living room floor. I sat on the edge of the couch, staring blankly at the flickering television, but the news about the local park renovation barely registered in my mind. My thoughts were elsewhere, lost in the labyrinth of grief and confusion that had defined my life since Emma's accident. "Daddy?" The soft, hesitant voice broke through my reverie. I turned to see Amelia standing in the doorway, her small frame silhouetted by the light behind her. She looked different. Something was off. My heart sank at the sight of her downturned shoulders and the way her fingers fidgeted with the hem of her shirt. "Yes, sweetheart," I replied, forcing a smile that I hoped would ease whatever burden she carried. "Can I talk to you?" she whispered, glancing nervously toward the ground. "Of course, Amelia. Come here." I patted the seat beside me, trying to mask my growing concern. She shuffled over and sat down, a noticeable distance between us, as if the space could somehow protect her from whatever it was she wanted to say. "Is it about school?" I asked, recalling her recent struggles with math. "Did something happen with your friends?" "No, it's about Margaret," she said, her voice barely a whisper. My heart dropped. I had sensed something was off between Amelia and Margaret, but I brushed it aside, thinking it was just a part of the adjustment. "What about her, honey?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly. Amelia hesitated, her eyes brimming with tears. She hurts me when you're not around." "What do you mean?" My pulse quickened, a cold dread settling in my stomach. "How does she hurt you?" "She yells at me and says mean things. And sometimes she pushes me," Amelia confessed, her voice cracking. "It's not a game, Daddy. I don't know why she's like this." The room felt like it was closing in on me. I could hardly breathe, the words hanging in the air like an unspoken curse. "Are you sure, Amelia? Maybe she was just upset and didn't mean it that way." "No," she cried, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Please believe me. I don't want to be around her when you're gone. I'm scared." I instinctively reached out, pulling her into my arms. "Oh, baby, I'm so sorry. I had no idea." My mind raced, grappling with disbelief and fear. How could this be happening? How could I have let someone into our lives who could hurt my little girl? "Can you promise me something?" Amelia asked, her voice muffled against my chest. "Anything," I vowed, my heart breaking for her. "Promise me you won't let her hurt me anymore," she pleaded, pulling back to look me in the eye, her gaze intense and pleading. "I promise," I said, my voice steadying as I made that promise. But inside, I felt a whirlwind of panic. How was I going to protect her? I realized I couldn't just sit here. I had to confront Margaret. The thought made my stomach churn, but Amelia needed me. I needed to find the truth, whatever it was. As the sunlight began to fade, I knew our lives were about to change forever. Sitting in the dimming light of the living room, I felt as if the walls were closing in around me. The soft hum of the television faded into a dull murmur, and my mind drifted back to a time when laughter filled this space, when Emma was still alive. Emma had a warmth about her that could brighten even the gloomiest of days. I remembered the way her laughter would echo through our small apartment, mingling with the sounds of her cooking in the kitchen. Those were the moments I cherished the most, cozy evenings spent playing board games with Amelia, our little family cocooned in joy and love. But everything changed that fateful day a little over a year ago. I could still picture the police officer's somber face, the way he hesitated before speaking. "I'm sorry to inform you." The words rang in my ears, a haunting refrain I wished I could forget. "Daddy?" Amelia's voice broke through my reverie again, pulling me back to the present. She had returned to the living room, clutching her favorite stuffed bear, Mr. Whiskers. "Are you okay?" I forced a smile, but it felt like a mask. "Yeah, just thinking about Mom," I replied, my voice thick with emotion. "Do you miss her?" Amelia asked, her big brown eyes searching mine. "Every day, sweetheart," I admitted, taking a deep breath to steady myself. She was such a wonderful person. You know, she used to say that family is the most important thing. Do you think she would like Margaret? Amelia asked, a hint of hesitance in her tone. It struck me how perceptive she was for her age. I hope she would want me to be happy, I said, trying to avoid the truth that weighed heavily on my heart. But I don't know if she would approve of how things are now. I glanced at the window, where the last rays of sunlight filtered through the curtains, as if signaling the end of something precious. Amelia played with Mr. Whiskers, her brow furrowed in thought. Sometimes I feel like Margaret is trying to replace Mom, and it makes me sad. I know, sweetheart, I feel that way too, I confessed, the guilt creeping back in. But I thought having someone around would help us heal. Help us heal, she echoed, a hint of frustration in her voice. It feels like she just makes things worse. Her words pierced through the layers of denial I had wrapped myself in. I had wanted to believe that Margaret could be a source of support for both of us, but now I was beginning to see the cracks in that facade. I thought it would make you happy, I said quietly. I wanted to give you a new start, but now my voice trailed off as the reality of the situation crashed down on me like a wave. Daddy, it's okay, Amelia said, climbing onto the couch beside me. You tried your best, but if she's not nice to me, then maybe we need to do something about it. Her innocent wisdom hit me hard. I realized that I had put my own needs above hers in my desire to move forward, and now I had to protect her, no matter the cost. Maybe we do, I replied, pulling her into a tight hug. I promise I will figure this out. You don't have to be scared anymore. As I held her close, I felt a flicker of determination ignite within me. I had to confront this situation head-on, for Amelia's sake and for Emma's memory. I couldn't let fear dictate our lives any longer. The shadows of the past were beginning to lift, revealing the hard path ahead. But for the first time in a long while, I felt ready to walk it. It had been a turbulent few months after Emma's passing. The house felt empty, the laughter that once echoed off the walls now replaced with a heavy silence. I was trying to navigate life as a single parent, while also grappling with my own grief. It was during one of those dark, lonely nights that I first met Margaret. It was late, and I had just finished a long day at the office. As I walked into the break room to grab a cup of coffee, I found her there, standing by the counter, her dark hair falling in soft waves around her shoulders. She had an easy smile, one that lit up her face, and I remember feeling an inexplicable warmth in her presence. "Hey there, I'm Margaret," she said, extending her hand. "You must be Adam. I've heard a lot about you from the team." "Nice to meet you, Margaret," I replied, shaking her hand. There was something comforting about her demeanor. It felt like a balm on a wound I wasn't ready to acknowledge. Over the next few weeks, we exchanged casual conversations, sharing small jokes and stories over lunch breaks. Her laughter was infectious, drawing me out of the fog of sorrow that had enveloped me. I remember one particular day when we were discussing our favorite childhood movies. "Have you ever seen The Princess Bride?" she asked, her eyes sparkling. "It's the ultimate fairy tale." I chuckled, recalling my own fond memories of watching it with Emma. "I love that movie. My wife used to quote the lines all the time. She said I was her Wesley." "Then I guess that makes you a pretty lucky guy," she replied, a hint of sadness in her voice that I couldn't quite place. As time passed, our conversations turned from casual to personal. It felt as though she understood the struggles I was facing as a single father. "You know, I think Amelia would really benefit from having a positive female role model in her life," she suggested one afternoon, a hopeful smile on her face. "Maybe you're right," I admitted, though a part of me still hesitated. "But it's a big adjustment for both of us. I don't want to push her too soon." "Just give it time," Margaret said, leaning in slightly. "She'll warm up to me. Kids are resilient." Her confidence made me believe it was possible, so I took the leap. A few weeks later, after what felt like an eternity of uncertainty, I invited Margaret over for dinner. I hoped it would be a nice evening for all of us, a chance for Amelia to get to know her in a relaxed setting. That night, I set the table with our best dishes, hoping to create a welcoming atmosphere. Amelia, can you help me with the salad? I called from the kitchen, trying to keep my voice light. Do I have to? She replied, her tone flat. Come on, it'll be fun. We're making a great dinner for a guest, I coaxed. Fine, she muttered, reluctantly joining me. I noticed she kept glancing toward the door, her apprehension palpable. When Margaret arrived, she swept in like a breeze, bringing an air of excitement with her. Hello, you two, she chirped, kneeling down to Amelia's level. I brought dessert, chocolate chip cookies, your favorite, right? Amelia's expression shifted slightly, the corners of her mouth lifting just a bit. Yeah, she replied, though her voice lacked enthusiasm. See, I told you I would make this a fun night, Margaret said, winking at her. Now let's get this party started. As we settled down to eat, I watched Amelia's initial hesitance begin to fade. The three of us engaged in light conversation, but beneath the surface, I could feel the tension. Amelia was polite but distant, her eyes darting back and forth as if she were waiting for the other shoe to drop. Amelia, you're so good at drawing, Margaret said, trying to draw her out. I'd love to see some of your artwork sometime. Okay, Amelia replied quietly, her fork poking at her food. Why don't we plan a fun art day together? Margaret suggested, her tone light and inviting. Just you and me, we can paint and bake cookies. What do you think? I don't know, Amelia murmured, her brow furrowed. Come on, Amelia. It could be really fun, I chimed in, hoping to encourage her. Maybe, she said, but her lack of enthusiasm was evident. After dinner, as I cleared the table, I caught a glimpse of Amelia slipping away to her room. I followed her, concerned. Hey, everything okay? I asked, leaning against the doorframe. I don't know, Dad, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. She seems nice, but I just don't feel right. The unease in her voice sent a chill through me. What do you mean? It's just, I can't explain it. Her gaze dropped to the floor, and I could see the conflict in her eyes. As the evening wore on, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was walking a tightrope, balancing between wanting to give Amelia a new beginning and protecting her from potential hurt. Little did I know, this was only the beginning of our challenges with Margaret. The days turned into weeks, and the initial excitement surrounding Margaret's arrival began to fade, replaced by an uncomfortable tension that lingered in our home. The cozy atmosphere I had hoped for had given way to an underlying sense of unease, especially around Amelia. It was as if a storm was brewing just beyond our front door, and I could feel its ominous presence growing stronger each day. Amelia had always been the bright spark in our lives, her laughter and curiosity bringing light to our dim spirits. But lately, she had become increasingly withdrawn. She spent hours in her room, doodling in her sketchbook, her joy replaced by a quiet melancholy that worried me deeply. One evening, as I was cleaning up after dinner, I noticed Amelia sitting at the dining table, staring blankly at a half-finished drawing of a flower. The vibrant colors she typically loved to use were absent. Instead, the drawing was muted, lacking life. Hey, sweetheart, what are you working on? I asked, hoping to coax her out of her shell. Just a drawing, she mumbled, not looking up. It looks beautiful. Can I see it? I moved closer, my curiosity piqued. No, she said sharply, her voice barely above a whisper. It's not done. The defensiveness in her tone struck me, and I took a step back, feeling the distance growing between us. Okay, no problem, I replied, trying to keep my tone light. You can show it to me when you're ready. As I turned to leave, Margaret entered the room, her presence commanding yet unsettling. What are you two talking about? She asked, her voice cheerful but tinged with something that felt off. Just some art, I said, glancing back at Amelia, who remained silent, her gaze fixed on the table. Art is a wonderful way to express feelings, Margaret chimed in, approaching Amelia. How about we have an art day this weekend? Just you and me, remember? Amelia's eyes widened slightly, and she shook her head. I don't want to, she replied firmly, surprising both of us with her sudden assertiveness. Why not? Margaret asked, her tone shifting slightly, a hint of frustration creeping in. We could have so much fun together. I don't feel like it, Amelia insisted, her voice steady but quiet, as if she were summoning every ounce of courage within her. Margaret's smile faltered for a moment, and I could see the tension in her posture. Well, you should really try to spend time with me, she said, her voice forced. You might actually enjoy it. Maybe later, Amelia muttered, clearly not wanting to engage further. All right then, Margaret replied, her voice slightly colder now. But you'll miss out on the fun. With that, she turned away, leaving an uncomfortable silence hanging in the air. I could feel the tension between them crackling like static electricity, and I knew I needed to intervene. Amelia, it's okay to say no if you don't want to, I said, hoping to reassure her. You don't have to do anything you're not comfortable with. I know, Dad, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I glanced at Margaret, who seemed taken aback by the exchange. I was just trying to connect with her, she said, her tone defensive. I thought it would help her adjust. I appreciate that, I replied, my tone cautious. But we need to respect her feelings, too. She's still figuring things out. Margaret crossed her arms, her expression shifting from concern to annoyance. I just thought I could help, she said, her voice tight. Isn't that what you wanted? For us to bond? I wanted Amelia to feel safe and comfortable, I replied, feeling a surge of protectiveness for my daughter. And right now, it doesn't seem like that's happening. Margaret huffed, rolling her eyes. Fine, I just wanted to make things better. Making things better means listening to Amelia, I said firmly, trying to bridge the growing divide. We're all adjusting here. Amelia slipped away from the table, retreating to her room, and I felt the weight of the moment settle heavily on my shoulders. We need to figure this out, I said, turning back to Margaret, my frustration bubbling to the surface. This isn't how it's supposed to be. As the evening wore on, I couldn't shake the feeling that the air had changed in our home. The warmth and light I had hoped would envelop us were giving way to something colder and darker. I needed to protect Amelia from whatever shadows were creeping in, but I also knew I had to address the growing rift with Margaret before it spiraled out of control. I glanced toward Amelia's closed door, my heart heavy with uncertainty. I hoped that somewhere within the storm, we could find our way back to the light. The days blurred into a routine of tension, with each passing moment steeped in a sense of dread that something was terribly wrong. While Margaret tried to maintain a facade of normalcy, Amelia's behavior became increasingly erratic. It was as if a shadow had settled over her spirit, dimming the bright light she once radiated. I could feel the anxiety gnawing at my insides, the worry for Amelia's well-being consuming my thoughts. Each night, I would check on her before bed, pulling the door open slightly to peer inside. She would often be sitting on her bed, the soft glow of her bedside lamp illuminating her hunched figure as she scribbled away in her sketchbook. The colorful drawings I had once admired had been replaced with darker, more haunting images, strange creatures, and twisted faces that seemed to reflect her inner turmoil. One evening, as I walked past her room, I hesitated, the sound of her quiet sobs piercing the stillness. My heart raced as I knocked gently on the door. "Amelia, can I come in?" Okay," she replied, her voice muffled. As I stepped inside, I found her curled up on her bed, clutching Mr. Whiskers tightly against her chest. The room was dimly lit, the walls adorned with her drawings, but I could see the remnants of tears on her cheeks. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" I asked, concern flooding my voice. "Nothing, Dad," she said quickly, wiping her eyes and forcing a weak smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Just a little tired." I sat down on the edge of her bed, the weight of my concern pressing down on me. "You don't have to pretend with me, Amelia. You can tell me anything." I don't want to talk about it," she murmured, her gaze dropping to the floor. "Is it about Margaret?" I asked gently, sensing the unease in her words. I don't want to say anything bad about her, Amelia whispered, her voice trembling. I know you like her. But you're my priority, I said firmly, reaching out to touch her arm. If she's hurting you, I need to know. You can trust me. Amelia hesitated, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. It's just, she gets really mad sometimes. When you're not around, she yells at me for the smallest things. And she doesn't let me do what I want. My heart sank at her admission, the realization hitting me like a punch to the gut. What do you mean? What does she yell about? She says I'm being annoying or that I should clean up more. Sometimes she doesn't let me talk, Amelia said, her voice breaking. And when I try to tell her how I feel, she gets angry. Amelia, I'm so sorry you're going through this, I said softly, pulling her into a gentle embrace. You deserve to feel safe and happy, especially in your own home. It's just hard, she whispered, her voice muffled against my shoulder. I feel like I can't do anything right. I just want you to be happy, Dad, but I don't know how to make it work with her. I held her tighter, feeling the weight of her words. You don't have to fix anything, Amelia. You just need to be yourself. I'm here to take care of you. I promise I'll make sure you're okay. But what if she gets mad at you too? Amelia asked, pulling back to look at me, fear etched across her face. What if she yells at you for not making me do what she says? Amelia, listen to me, I said, my voice steady. Margaret may be trying to take on a role in our lives, but that doesn't mean you have to accept anything that makes you uncomfortable. I will always stand by you. You are my #1 priority. As she nodded slowly, I could see a flicker of relief in her eyes, but it was quickly overshadowed by doubt. But what if she doesn't like you anymore? What if we lose her? Then we will face that together, I reassured her, brushing a strand of hair away from her face. You and I are a team. No one can come between us, okay? Okay, she replied softly, her voice trembling but filled with a flicker of hope. But what if she does something worse? I took a deep breath, gathering my thoughts. We'll make a plan. If you ever feel scared or uncomfortable, you come to me right away, no matter what. Promise? I promise, she said, her eyes brightening a bit as she squeezed my hand tightly. As I left her room that night, I felt a surge of determination. I needed to confront Margaret about Amelia's experience, but I also knew it wouldn't be easy. The thought of standing up to her felt daunting, yet I had to protect my daughter at all costs. The protective instinct within me was fierce. I couldn't allow Amelia to suffer in silence any longer. In the days that followed, I tried to keep the lines of communication open with Amelia, encouraging her to share her thoughts and feelings. I watched as the shadows of fear slowly began to lift from her, even if only slightly. But I knew that the real challenge lay ahead. I needed to face Margaret, to demand that she treat my daughter with the kindness and respect she deserved. That weekend, I resolved to have that conversation, a storm of uncertainty swirling inside me as I prepared to confront the growing tension in our home. The time had come to uncover the truth behind Margaret's behavior and ensure that Amelia could finally breathe freely again. The weekend arrived, and with it, a gnawing sense of anxiety that coiled tightly in my stomach. I had spent the last few days preparing for this conversation with Margaret, mentally rehearsing the words I needed to say. My primary goal was to protect Amelia, but I also felt the weight of my relationship with Margaret hanging in the balance. Would she listen? Would she deny everything? As I paced in the living room, I noticed the sunlight filtering through the window, casting long shadows on the floor. It should have been a comforting sight, but instead, it felt like the calm before a storm. My mind raced back to Amelia's tear-streaked face, the weight of her silence pressing heavily on my chest. Dad, can we play a game? Amelia's voice pulled me from my thoughts, her eyes bright with a hint of hope. Sure, sweetheart, I replied, forcing a smile. Let's play after I talk to Margaret, okay? Okay, she said hesitantly, her gaze dropping. I could sense her unease, a reflection of my own. Taking a deep breath, I walked toward the kitchen where Margaret was preparing lunch. The scent of sautéed vegetables wafted through the air, a stark contrast to the turmoil brewing within me. As I entered, I found her humming softly to herself, a cheerful tune that felt oddly out of place in my current mood. "Margaret," I said, my voice steady but laced with urgency. She turned, a bright smile on her face that faded slightly as she noticed my expression. "Hey, everything okay?" "No, not really," I replied, my heart pounding. "We need to talk." "Sure, what's on your mind?" she asked, crossing her arms as she leaned against the counter. I hesitated for a moment, choosing my words carefully. "It's about Amelia. I've noticed she's been different since you moved in. She seems sad, and I think it's because of the way you've been treating her." Margaret's demeanor shifted immediately, her smile evaporating. "What do you mean? I haven't done anything to her." "Amelia told me you've been yelling at her and saying hurtful things," I pressed, feeling a mix of anger and desperation. "She's scared of you, Margaret. That's not how a family should be." Her expression hardened and she took a step closer to me, her eyes narrowing. "Are you seriously accusing me of being a bad stepmother? She's just a kid, Adam. Kids can be dramatic. Maybe she's just exaggerating." "Exaggerating?" I repeated, incredulous. "She's 8 years old. She shouldn't have to exaggerate anything to get your attention or care. She's not a burden to be dealt with. She's a child who deserves love." "I'm trying to help her adjust," Margaret snapped, her voice rising. "I'm here to be a good influence, but if she's acting out, that's on her, not me." "Margaret, this isn't about acting out," I said, trying to keep my voice calm despite the rising tension. "This is about your behavior toward her. You've been unkind, and it's affecting her deeply." "I don't have to explain myself to you," she retorted, her tone defensive. "You don't understand how hard it is for me either. I stepped into your life to help, but I can't be perfect." "Perfect is not what I expect," I replied, frustration boiling over. "I expect you to be kind. I expect you to treat Amelia with respect. She needs a loving stepmother, not someone who makes her feel inadequate." Margaret's expression shifted from anger to hurt, and for a moment, I saw a flicker of vulnerability in her eyes. "You don't get it," she said softly, her voice dropping. "I lost my job and came here to build a new life. I thought this would be a fresh start, but nothing is easy." "I understand that, but you can't take that out on Amelia," I replied gently, sensing her pain but unwilling to back down. "She's not the source of your struggles." "You think I'm a monster?" she asked, her voice cracking. "You think I want to hurt her?" "I think you need to acknowledge how your actions are affecting her," I said, trying to reach her. "It's not too late to change. You can be the person she needs." Margaret turned away from me, her shoulders slumping as she faced the sink. "I don't know how to fix this," she murmured, almost to herself. "Then let's figure it out together," I offered, my heart softening. "I want to help you. We can find a way to communicate better. I want Amelia to feel safe and loved in our home, and I want you to be part of that." Silence hung in the air, thick with unspoken words. After a long pause, she turned back to me, her expression unreadable. "Maybe I haven't handled everything perfectly. I didn't realize how serious it was." "That's the first step," I said, feeling a glimmer of hope. "Let's talk to Amelia together. We can apologize and work on building a better relationship." Margaret nodded slowly, her eyes misty. "I just want to do right by you both. I'm scared of messing it up." "You won't if we work on it together," I reassured her, feeling the tension in the room begin to dissipate. "We can make this a home again." As we stood there, a fragile sense of understanding began to form between us. I knew it wouldn't be easy, and I was still wary of the uncertainty ahead. But for the first time in a long time, I felt a flicker of hope that things could improve. That evening, as we sat down to dinner together, I felt a tentative shift in the atmosphere. The laughter I had missed seemed just within reach, and I was determined to hold on to it. Amelia needed to see that we were united, that the adults in her life were willing to do whatever it took to create a safe and loving environment. "Hey, Amelia," I called as she entered the room, a small smile tugging at her lips. "We've been talking, and we want to have a family meeting tonight." She looked between us, her curiosity piqued. "About what?" "About how we can all get along better," I replied, my heart swelling with hope. "And how we can support each other." Margaret nodded, her expression softening. "I want to make things right with you, Amelia. I'm sorry if I've made you feel bad." Amelia's eyes widened, surprise flickering across her face. "You mean it?" "Of course," I said, my voice steady. "We're a family, and families work together." As we sat down to dinner, I couldn't help but feel that perhaps, just maybe, we could begin to rebuild the fragile threads of our lives into something stronger. The road ahead would be challenging, but I was ready to face it, not just for Amelia, but for all of us. Together, we could confront the past and embrace the future, one small step at a time. The sun rose the next day, casting a warm glow through the kitchen window, but the light felt hollow. I had managed to share a quiet breakfast with Margaret and Amelia, and though we exchanged smiles, the unspoken tension lingered in the air. I was relieved that Margaret had agreed to work on her relationship with Amelia, but I knew we couldn't simply gloss over the issues at hand. I needed to understand the full extent of Amelia's experiences. "Amelia," I said, setting my coffee cup down as I turned to her, "can we talk for a moment before you head to school?" Sure," she replied, glancing up from her cereal, a hint of apprehension flickering in her eyes. "Margaret, do you mind if we have a quick chat?" I asked, my gaze shifting to her. "Of course," she replied, a touch of worry flashing across her face. "I'll clean up the kitchen." I gestured for Amelia to join me in the living room, my heart racing with anticipation. "Come sit with me, okay?" I said gently, motioning toward the couch. As she settled beside me, I could see her fidgeting with the hem of her shirt, a sign of her unease. "What's wrong, Dad?" she asked, her voice small. "Nothing's wrong. I just want to understand what you've been going through with Margaret," I said, keeping my tone light but sincere. "Can you tell me more about what happens when I'm not around?" Amelia bit her lip, her gaze dropping to her lap. "It's just, I don't want to get her in trouble," she mumbled, her voice barely above a whisper. "Sweetheart, I promise I won't get her in trouble," I reassured her. "I need to know so we can make sure you feel safe. You can talk to me." She took a deep breath, her little shoulders slumping. "Sometimes she just gets really loud, like when I don't clean my room fast enough or if I accidentally drop something. She says I'm a lazy girl and that I'm not trying hard enough." "Does she ever hurt you?" I pressed gently, feeling my heart race with concern. Amelia hesitated, her eyes darting away. "Not really, but she grabs my arm sometimes when she's mad, and it hurts." "Grabs your arm?" I echoed, the blood rushing to my ears. "What do you mean by that?" "She just pulls me when I don't listen," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "And it hurts, but I don't think she means to." "That doesn't sound okay, Amelia," I said firmly. "You should never feel hurt or scared because someone is angry." "I know," she whispered, tears glistening in her eyes. "But I want to be a good daughter. I don't want you to be mad at her either. I know she's trying to help." "Being a good daughter doesn't mean putting up with things that make you feel bad," I said softly. "You deserve to be treated with kindness, always." "But what if she gets mad at me for saying anything?" Amelia asked, her voice shaking. "If she ever makes you feel scared to speak up, that's when you tell me, okay?" I said, taking her hands in mine. "I'm here for you, no matter what." Amelia nodded, though uncertainty lingered in her eyes. "Okay." Just then, Margaret re-entered the room, wiping her hands on a towel. "Everything okay?" she asked, a hint of tension creeping into her voice. "Yeah, we were just talking about school," I replied quickly, not wanting to alarm Amelia further. Margaret's eyes narrowed slightly, but she smiled. Oh, good. Amelia, do you want to tell me what you talked about? Amelia hesitated, looking between us, her small hands clenching in her lap. We just talked about homework and stuff, she finally said, her voice steady. Okay, Margaret replied, though the skepticism was evident in her expression. I hope you're staying on top of your studies. Of course, Amelia said, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Good, I added, sensing the tension in the air. Amelia's doing great in school. I think she just needs a little extra encouragement. Right, Margaret said, crossing her arms. She's a smart girl. She just needs to try harder. I caught Amelia's eye, and she nodded slightly, as if understanding my unspoken message to be careful. As Amelia left for school, the air felt charged with unsaid words. I knew I needed to confront Margaret again, but I also had to tread carefully. The last thing I wanted was for Amelia to feel caught in the middle of our conflict. Later that day, while Margaret was in the living room tidying up, I gathered my thoughts and walked in, taking a deep breath to steady myself. Margaret, can we talk again? She looked up, her expression wary. About what? About Amelia and the way she's feeling, I began, choosing my words carefully. I don't want to put you on the defensive, but I'm worried. I thought we discussed this already, she said, her voice tight. I'm doing my best. I know you're trying, I replied, keeping my tone calm. But what she's telling me concerns me. She's feeling hurt, and I don't think it's right for you to dismiss her feelings. Margaret frowned, crossing her arms defensively. Kids can be overly sensitive. I'm just trying to discipline her. Disciplining her is one thing, but hurting her physically is another, I countered, feeling my frustration rise. She shouldn't have to feel scared of you. Scared? She repeated, her eyes flashing. You're exaggerating, Adam. Kids are resilient. They bounce back from a little yelling. No, this isn't just about yelling. It's about how you're making her feel. I pressed, unwilling to back down. I want you to think about how you interact with her. You can't expect her to flourish if she feels like she's walking on eggshells around you. Margaret's expression softened for a moment, but it was quickly replaced by defensiveness. I can't help it if she doesn't listen. It's my job to make sure she behaves. By scaring her, I challenged, my heart racing. This isn't discipline. This is abuse. You need to recognize the difference. She flinched at my words, but instead of engaging, she turned her back to me, staring out the window. Maybe you just don't understand, she said quietly, almost defeated. I'm not a bad person, Adam. I'm trying to help her. I know you're trying, I replied, my voice softening. But there's a better way to help her without resorting to fear and anger. Let's talk to someone, maybe a family therapist. We can learn how to communicate better. I don't need therapy, she snapped, spinning around to face me. I'm not the problem here. Amelia is being difficult, and you're making excuses for her. I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. It's not about excusing behavior. It's about understanding it. If you really want to help her, you need to listen. We need to work together on this. Work together, she scoffed. I'm not the villain here, Adam. Maybe you should talk to your daughter and see how much she's exaggerating. I stepped closer, my heart pounding. I've listened to her, and I believe her. It's time you start doing the same. Margaret fell silent, her eyes narrowing as she crossed her arms tightly over her chest. You're taking her side. I'm taking her side because she's my daughter, I said, frustration bubbling over. This isn't about sides, it's about her well-being. And what about me? She challenged, her voice rising. What about my feelings in all of this? I've sacrificed everything to be here. I know you have, I replied, my tone softening. But this isn't just about you anymore. We're a family, and families need to support one another. I need you to support Amelia, not make her feel worse. Margaret stared at me for a long moment, her expression unreadable. I don't want to talk about this anymore, she said finally, her voice cold. Fine, I replied, my heart heavy. But this isn't over, Margaret. We need to address this before it tears us apart. As I walked away, I felt the weight of despair pressing down on me. The conversation had only deepened the divide between us, and I could feel the tension in our home rising again. I wanted so desperately for things to improve, but it was clear that denial and defensiveness stood in the way. That evening, as I lay in bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were at a crossroads. I had to protect Amelia at all costs, but I also needed to figure out how to bridge the gap with Margaret. I closed my eyes, hoping for clarity, but all I felt was an overwhelming sense of uncertainty about the future. The path forward seemed daunting, but I knew I had to keep seeking the truth, both for Amelia and for the fragile family we were trying to build. The days passed slowly, each one heavier than the last. Tension hung in the air like an oppressive fog, and I could feel the strain in every interaction with Margaret. Amelia was quieter than usual, and my heart ached for her. I spent countless hours pondering our situation, wrestling with the implications of what Amelia had shared. I knew I had to take action, and it had to be soon. One evening, I returned home from work, exhausted but determined. The sun had already set, leaving the house in shadows. I found Amelia sitting at the kitchen table, her homework sprawled out before her but untouched. She glanced up as I entered, her expression a mix of relief and anxiety. "Hey, kiddo," I said softly, kneeling beside her. "How was school today?" "It was okay," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "I did what you said. I told my teacher I was having trouble with some math problems." "I'm proud of you for speaking up," I said, hoping to coax a smile from her. "Did she help you?" "Yeah, she did. But I don't want to go home," Amelia admitted, her eyes welling with tears. "I don't like being there when Margaret is there. It's too scary." My heart sank. "I know it's tough, sweetheart," I said, gently squeezing her hand. "But I want you to know you can always talk to me about how you feel. We can work through this together." Just then, Margaret entered the kitchen, her expression unreadable as she glanced between us. "What's going on?" she asked, a hint of defensiveness creeping into her tone. "Just talking about school," I replied, trying to keep my voice neutral. "Amelia's been working on some math problems." "Oh, that's nice," Margaret said, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I hope she's not just avoiding her chores again." "Dad said I could finish my homework first," Amelia interjected, her voice rising slightly in defiance. I held my breath, the tension palpable as I looked at Margaret, who stiffened at Amelia's words. "Well, you need to learn responsibility," she replied, her tone sharp. "If you're going to be lazy, then I'll have to teach you a lesson." "Margaret, can we talk for a minute?" I said, cutting in before the situation escalated. I motioned for her to follow me into the living room, my heart racing as I led the way. As we settled onto the couch, I glanced back at Amelia, who watched us with wide eyes, clearly worried. "I want us to be a family," I began, keeping my tone steady. "But things can't continue the way they are." "What do you mean?" Margaret asked, crossing her arms defensively. "I mean, we need to address the way you've been treating Amelia," I replied firmly. "She's afraid of you, and that's not okay. She's a child. She needs discipline." Margaret shot back, her voice rising. "If I don't correct her behavior, she'll grow up to be a spoiled brat." "That's not discipline, Margaret. That's fear," I said, struggling to keep my frustration in check. "You can't control her through intimidation. She should feel safe in her own home." "Safe?" Margaret laughed, but it was hollow. "You think I'm the problem. You're the one who's coddling her. You're enabling her to be weak." "Coddling?" "No, I'm teaching her to trust me," I replied, feeling anger bubble to the surface. "I refuse to stand by and watch her suffer because of your misguided ideas about discipline." Margaret's expression hardened, her eyes narrowing. "You think you know everything, don't you? This is how I was raised, and I turned out fine." "Just because you were raised that way doesn't mean it's right," I countered, my voice rising. "Your methods are damaging our daughter, and I can't ignore that anymore. She stood abruptly, her hands on her hips. What do you plan to do about it? You think talking to me like this is going to change anything? I took a deep breath, the weight of my decision pressing heavily on my chest. I thought long and hard about this. If things don't change, I may have to consider what's best for Amelia, even if that means moving out. Margaret's eyes widened in shock, and for a moment, I saw a flicker of fear in her expression. You wouldn't dare, she said, her voice low and dangerous. You can't be serious. I am serious, I replied, my resolve hardening. I'm not going to let her live in fear. I want her to grow up in a loving, supportive environment, not one filled with intimidation. You're being dramatic, she shot back, but the quiver in her voice betrayed her. You wouldn't take her away from me. Is that what this is about? I asked, my voice steady but firm. You think I'm taking her away? This isn't about taking her from you. This is about protecting her. I want to work together to create a safe space for both of you, but you have to be willing to change. Margaret's eyes glistened with anger and something else. Hurt? Regret? You don't understand the pressure I'm under, she said, her voice cracking. I'm trying to help you both. You think it's easy being a stepmom. I know it's not easy, but that doesn't excuse the way you've treated her, I said, my heart softening slightly. I want to help you. We can seek counseling together. We can find ways to communicate better, but you need to want that. Margaret turned away, her jaw clenched tight. I can't believe you would threaten to leave me over this, she said, her voice cold. I'm not threatening, I'm stating a fact, I replied, my voice low. If nothing changes, I'll do what's necessary to protect our daughter. She spun around to face me, her expression a mixture of fury and despair. And what if I don't want to change? What if I can't? Then I have to make a choice, I said, feeling the weight of my words settle heavily between us. I have to choose Amelia's well-being above all else. I can't watch her suffer, Margaret. Silence stretched between us, the air thick with tension. Margaret's expression softened for a moment, a flicker of vulnerability breaking through her defenses. I didn't mean to hurt her, she whispered, tears brimming in her eyes. I know you didn't, I said gently, my heart aching for both of them. But intention isn't enough. We need to change the way we interact with her. If we can't do that together, then I'll have to make the hardest decision of my life. Margaret's gaze dropped to the floor, her shoulders slumping. I don't want to lose you, Adam, she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. But I feel so lost right now. Then let's find a way back together, I said, my heart racing with hope. We can work through this, but it has to start now. I'm willing to help, but you need to meet me halfway. After a long pause, Margaret nodded slowly, the fight in her eyes dimming. Okay, she said softly, her voice breaking. I'll try, for Amelia. As we sat in silence, the tension slowly began to dissipate, replaced by a fragile hope. I knew it wouldn't be easy, but for the first time, it felt like we were on the same path, one that could lead us toward healing and understanding. The decision I had faced felt right, and as I thought of Amelia, I realized I would do whatever it took to protect her. No matter what challenges lay ahead, I was determined to make our family whole again. If you liked my story, please like and subscribe. This will be the best reward for me.